There's one thing that DaVinci Resolve Planar Tracker does that just drives me bonkers. Why does this weird masking happen when I add a color correction node? How can we fix it, and what are the other workarounds? And while we're at it, other tips and tricks to get the most out of your composites when doing screen replacements in DaVinci Resolve. There are many ways to do screen replacements and lots of different tools, just like there's different ways to film a screen for replacement. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use DaVinci Resolve's Planar Tracker for a typical shot and solve issues that you may come across along the way. So this is the shot that we're going to be working with. We need to replace this screen. It's a typical shot, but there are a few gotchas that are typical for these kinds of shots. Number one is that we start really close in, so we don't really see the edges. Number two is that it completely goes off screen, so we need the Planar Tracker to be able to capture all that. And number three is that the camera rack focuses from the TV to the people. So we need to address that as well to make sure that that blends in nicely in that transition. And this is the shot that we got from editorial that we're going to be placing in. Let's track this shot. I select the shot and then click on the Fusion page. And we have our media in and then media out. First things first is to find a reference frame of the entire screen or as close to it as possible. I'm just going to add a view LUT, and there was a LUT that was provided from editorial. But if you know the camera, if you're working with log footage, you can just add in a LUT that works with the camera. Now this is just a viewing LUT. It's not going to change anything with the footage. So if we go back, it's still log footage. And right off the bat, I noticed something else about this shot. I'm just going to go full frame. One thing that I noticed right off the bat is because the screen is actually on, and the camera sensor and the screen are kind of fighting each other for the resolution. And we can see all this moire pattern that's happening when it's transitioning. So that could affect the way the Planar Tracker works as well. So if we need to deal with that, and I'll show you how to deal with that if it does cause a problem with the Planar Tracker. So we're just going to go back to Fusion, click on our media in, again, go to a good reference frame, press Shift Spacebar, start typing in Planar Tracker. Click add, we have our Planar Tracker. And one of the first things that I would also do is just go to options and click on orthogonal pipes. And this personally for me is a cleaner way to look at the node structure because I can follow the pipes a lot easier. So click on your Planar Tracker, and then we'll go up here. And one of the first things we want to do is we want to set a reference time. And we're just going to click set because we can see the entire screen. And that sets our frame for 241. Under tracker, we have point and hybrid point area. And the difference between point and hybrid point is that hybrid point is more accurate with high contrast surfaces with minimal occlusions. So if a moving object passes in front of the surface in the video, you'll need to create an occlusion mask, where the point tracker is faster and creates occlusion masks, but that may cause more jittering of the tracking data. So just know if you're using hybrid, you're going to need to use this input node to create your own occlusion mask. And I'll show you how to do that, but a little bit later. Right now, we're just going to leave it at hybrid point because this is nice high contrast. And once it's on, it's selected. We're just going to click in the space that we want to track, because the Planar Tracker in DaVinci Resolve wants to be on the surface that you're tracking, where other applications, they want you to go outside of the surface just to get the entire surface. So just keep that in mind. And once we're set, we're going to leave the motion type at perspective, and we're just going to click track. And we're going to track forward. Even though we're in the middle, we're going to track forward until this whole thing gets off the screen. And it's going to track itself off pretty well. But then there's a point where I know it's going to lose it because it goes out of focus and you can see it jump around. But we're going to deal with that in a minute. Then we're going to go back to the reference frame, click go. That goes back to the reference frame that we were working on. And then we're just going to click track backwards. So now we're tracking backwards. Tracker, just know that the hybrid point and tracker is going to be a little bit slower, but it is more precise. And I can see that the more A is there. It's not affecting the track, but it may or may not. Hopefully it doesn't, but I'll show you how to deal with that if it does. So that looks like a pretty good track, almost done. And that was good. So I'm just gonna go back to this frame here where you can definitely see all that little detail. If that was messing up the track, what I would do is just click on media in and add in a blur node, and then I would blur it by 2 or 3 pixels, and now you can see it's softened all that up, but there's still enough contrast here that the tracker would work. So you can actually use that in those sections that if there's too much noise or detail, that you can just blur that up where it won't mess up the track. But in this case, we don't need it, so we can just delete that. It worked fairly well. So when we play it back, just got to go back to this back section because it starts to mess up. And if I zoom out, you can actually start seeing that monitor getting stretched because the planar tracker doesn't know that it's not turning as much. You can see it getting stretched and then just going bananas. So we're just going to go back to roughly where it still felt good. That feels good, right around there. And we're going to change the motion type from perspective to just translation, because right now I just want the motion to continue off without changing any other parameters, because nothing much is happening here. If there was more rotation or skew or anything like that, then I would start going down this to keep adding as much as possible. So right now I just want it to move off the rest of the screen, and we're going to click track from here, and we only have a few frames that we need to do. So it got as far as it can go. Maybe I'll change it to point. No, it doesn't want to do the rest of it. So we'll deal with that in a moment as well. So it's gone as far as it can. So we're just going to go back to, I'm going to click on the reference frame. And what we're going to do here is change the operation mode from track to corner pin, because that's ultimately what we're doing. And then we can just stretch it out. And in this case, I would actually go a little bit beyond the edge of the TV, because we want to make sure that when it's done its tracking, we don't want to see this white. Like if we do this corner pin perfectly, this little white edge is going to pop through and it's going to become very, very noticeable. And that's what's going to give away the effect that this is a screen replacement. If you need to zoom in to make it look as good as possible, then you can do that. Just use your middle mouse wheel to scroll in. If you don't have a middle mouse, then I don't know what to say. You need to get one. And because this is all black, if you extend it out a little bit, then we can hide this little transition here, because you don't want to go in like, oh, perfectly, but then this white will come through. Now, if this was green and we can composite it out, that's a little bit different, but we don't have that. We can try to do a luma key on this, but in this case, I'm just going to stick with extending it out a little bit, just so we can refine it if need be. We're just going to go a little bit out, a couple pixels. So we're set and kind of happy with it. I'm going to extend it out a little bit more, because I have a feeling that towards the end of the shot, we're going to really see come out just a little bit, just enough where I know that will mask it a little bit. And then we're just going to open up corner pin and show grid, and you can just play it back. And if you find that your system's not playing back, you can actually turn off high quality just by right-clicking right underneath the viewer, turn off high quality, and that should play back a little bit faster. And then we can just kind of scan it and see how it is. You can see it's pretty good right at the end. So we got to make sure that it leaves the frame. So what we're going to do is, extend this out, move that up. So this looks like a frame that is still pretty good for the corner pin. I'm going to create a keyframe for the top right and the bottom right. So these ones specifically. And then I'm going to move forward until it stops. And I'm just going to extend it out again up here, and then drag it down here, move over a frame, and just manually finish up these few points just to get it off screen completely. And we can just play that back. Looks pretty good. Zooms in. So we have a few keyframes for this corner, even though it stretches towards the end. That's fine. We're out at that point. So I'm just going to go back, turn off the show grid. Going to bring this back up and move this down. And now I'm going to drag in the media. And here I'm just going to press F2 or function F2. Name it TV footage. Drag it in. You see that right off the bat, it's already scaling out. So that's a good frame was still there. I'm just going to click animate corner pin group, create keyframes for all that, move forward, going to lift that up. So that looks pretty good. So if you notice that the background feels much softer than this foreground does. So as it goes, it's just sharp all the time. Where the background definitely has motion blur and it's sharp. So first thing we can do is just go to the Planar Tracker, go to settings, and then just click motion blur. And that solves one issue where we get the motion blur from the side. But here, it's still super sharp. And as we go towards the end of the whole background actually goes out of focus. So this line just doesn't work. As you can see, it just doesn't feel like it's working. So let's deal with the blur first. You think the simplest thing is just to add a blur node under your TV footage and then just blur it. All that does is blur the composite within the corner pin. So that's not what we want. So I'm just gonna make that 0. And then remove that. Okay, so then we want to make sure, we want to blur everything after the Planar Tracker. So then you'd think just drop it in after. But if we did that, then everything in the shot blurs because the Planar Tracker is set to foreground over background. We're taking the media in, or the shot, the original shot that we're tracking as the background, and then we're taking the TV footage and then putting that over top on the corner pin or the foreground. So we have the foreground over the background. So in this case, we want it to go foreground only because we want it to only affect the foreground. But when we do that, we're blurring exactly what we want it to blur. There's it off and then it blurs it, but then we get rid of the background. The workaround for this is we do want the blur to be after the Planar Tracker. Fine. That's when we need to add in a merge node. So then we take the original shot, pipe it into the merge, and then we take the blur and then we put that also into the merge, and then we pipe that all out. So now this is the flow. The background gets piped into the Planar Tracker, the TV footage gets put on top of it, but then we're only outputting the foreground. We're blurring that foreground, then we're merging the background and the blurred composite over top of the original footage. And then we're merging it to our media out. We're just gonna go back and reset this blur. We're just gonna go back and kind of just zoom in, and with no blur on. So if you press Command P, it will just bypass that complete node, or Control P. So if we do leave it on and then we set it to a 1 pixel blur, it already feels better. So if I just bypass that, you can see that 1 pixel blur really does add in a difference. I know it blurs the image as well, but we're scaling that down as well. So we can actually, if it's too much, we can actually set it to 0.5 to retain some of the texture and the noise from the original shot, but we still get a little bit of blur on that. So now we want to just scan through the shot, but then the other thing we want to add is the whole background blurs out. You can see the edge of the TV start to blur right around here. So right around here it starts to blur out because the camera has started racking to the people in the foreground. So we're just going to add a keyframe, and right around there is where and just find a nice spot, and then just created the keyframes. So the other thing is the contrast of this black, because this is a piece of footage that was given to us way too intense. So we need to actually bring that down. So we need to deal with that. So the simplest thing is just to put in a color correction node right after the TV footage. And I just want to lift the blacks. But as soon as I do that, DaVinci Resolve decides to go bananas. Not exactly sure why that happens. And I just want to deal with this black area and not anything within the footage. Even if I just wanted to lift these blacks, using the color correction node before doesn't seem to work. For some reason, DaVinci Resolve does this weird thing where it crops out the black and it adds this. And if we go to options and turn on pre-divide, post multiply, it gets rid of that weird frame, but it still crops everything else. So that's not what we want. If we just remove it from between the footage to the planar tracker and then we add it in after the planar tracker, it starts to affect everything. But if you go to options and you press pre-divide, post multiply, it seems to fix that issue and you can just adjust it. It started, but then it's affecting everything. There's a few other things you can try if that doesn't solve it. You can actually go to clipping mode and change it from none to domain or frame. But for the most part, that chain solves it. And sometimes, I don't know if it's a bug, but sometimes DaVinci Resolve doesn't want to correct that issue. So I have to restart either DaVinci Resolve or the computer. And sometimes it comes in, sometimes it doesn't. But there is a workaround that avoids using the color correction node in Fusion altogether. And I actually like this workflow better because the color corrector or the curves or all that, they feel limited in Fusion. So I would actually like to use all the color tools that are provided in DaVinci Resolve that are not available in these node plugins, in these node effects, because it's affecting everything. I'm just going to add a quick mask. So now we have a mask. Then if we did that, then the track doesn't match. And so there's an easier way that I find to set this up. So we're just going to remove this color corrector because we're going to use DaVinci Resolve's built-in powerful color correctors to do the work for us. And we'll also avoid any of those clipping issues that are present in some of these nodes. So my workaround for this is to just go back to the edit page, grab the footage that I'm working with, and then just create a new compound clip. I'm going to call it TV footage compound clip. Then I can open that up in its own timeline. So it shows up here, so it shows up in its own timeline. Then I can go to the color page, add in a new serial node. I can make any kind of lift or adjustments. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple mask around this because I don't have the original footage. So I need to be able to work with this right now. It's going to create a simple mask around this piece of footage. And for your footage, it may be different, but you'll be able to adjust it. So I create a simple mask around that, invert. Then I'll go to curves and just add in a couple curves. And now I can bump the black levels of just the footage. It's going to add in a little bit of softness around. So now I have control over the entire thing. Say if I wanted to add in a LUT, I can drop all that kind of stuff in. I can do all the color correction that DaVinci Resolve is known for on the color page and not trying to do color correction in Fusion with nodes. So in this case, I'm just lifting the black without touching anything else in the shot. But then I go back to the Fusion page and I drag in that compound clip. So I'm just going to rename that to TV footage compound clip, just so I know. So I have my original TV footage. I'm going to take that off the node and then drop in the new. So here's the original with the super blacks and then just replacing that footage. So now at any point, I can actually just go in and replace that footage or change the color correct to it. I can do all those things as I see fit. And I can just go back and say I wanted to do some crazy color changes just so we can see it. And go back to the Fusion page and all those color corrections are there. And I'm using all the powerful tools in DaVinci Resolve and not trying to do it with the limited tools that are in Fusion. So I'm just going to go back and just get rid of that. But at any point I can create a grade just for that footage here if I wanted to do that. Go back to Fusion. And now we're working with that clip and it blurs out and we're out. So that's one way to work with it. The other way to work with it, instead of doing a merge and having the whole clip merged here, the other workaround that you can do where you have a little bit more control on the coloring side is we're just going to bypass the merge node, turn it off, and we're just going to go right out of the blur into the output. We're going to go right from the blur into the media out. So we have this clip by itself, which is just the TV composited. And then we can go back to the original shot and just bring it in underneath. And we have that same composite. And if we play it back, it's there. Now we can go into the color page, and if we add a serial node, we can start adjusting everything that's on the screen by itself. Or if we want to click on the clip beneath it and say we wanted to add in our LUT over top of this, but then we scroll back, this hasn't been, we haven't added a LUT to the on-screen footage. So I have to click on it. And this is where I can add in a LUT just for that. Or if I want to do anything crazier, where I want to bump it up. And we have complete control, so it's its own clip on the timeline. So those are the two ways to go about getting access to having all the color controls in DaVinci Resolve and not trying to do it in the Fusion page. So you utilize the layers that are on the tracks for your playback. And the other thing that, the other tip that I want to chat about, so if we click on the Fusion clip, you can tell which one is a Fusion clip, is the one that has these little stars on them. We're just going to click on that. So the other thing is, what if you wanted to change the position of the start time of this? That's where you can just go to keyframes. We don't need the original TV footage. We want the compound clip, which is what we're using here. So if you just click on it, you'll see which one becomes active. If you wanted to change when the in and out, so if you wanted to change the in and out of these clips, you can just move the keyframes. Just by going up to keyframes up here, adjust the keyframes when that blur happens. So if you have a longer clip, instead of trying to trim it, you can actually trim it here. So overall, the Planar Tracker in DaVinci Resolve is really powerful and really good. I use it for a lot of simple shots, but honestly, if I was doing shots like this and there's something coming across the screen, then you'd have to actually just create a polygon. If you needed to occlude something, just click on the polygon and then you would create occlusion. You'd be able to create a simple mask with a polygon and then just pipe that into the occlusion input. And what you can just do a simple garbage mat around anything that occludes the screen. And then the Planar Tracker would use that garbage mat, telling it, don't track anything within that area. So that's how you use the occlusion mask input on the Planar Tracker if you needed to. But in this case, it was a simple screen replacement, but we just had to deal with the other issues like the color and the blurring of the edges. The other thing that comes up, say you had an image that wasn't exactly 16:9, so it doesn't fit the screen that you want, and you want to pipe that in. It's gonna turn off the LUT. So it's definitely distorting the image. So in this case, shift spacebar, add in a crop. Just add in a crop, then just go to auto crop and go back to the crop settings. And that's where you can adjust everything that you need. You can resize it to fit accordingly. Even here. Just gonna pipe in the original shot, turn on the blur. And honestly, a shot like this, I would use Mocha and probably After Effects, because for me, it is way more straightforward to be able to do the simple things like adjust the color, adjust the blur to the specific layer instead of trying to find this workaround, where I just find that workflow a little bit more intuitive. And Mocha is way more accurate when stuff needs to go off frame or there's occlusions. It's a lot easier workflow for me to be able to use Mocha for those kind of scenarios. So if you'd like a tutorial on how to do it in Mocha and After Effects, make sure you like this video, leave a comment, and as always, thanks for watching.